While everyone wants to make the highlight plays that they see their favorite players making all the time, that's not actually how you get good at League of Legends, or any other game for that matter. Being great is often just about being able to replicate favorable situations for yourself consistently, and climbing with tactics that yield predictable and positive outcomes every single time. And the most important part of the game that you need to win is the early game. It goes without saying that snowballing a lead is infinitely easier than trying to claw your way back into a game. The best part is that it just so happens that the first 3 minutes of every match are the most predictable and replicable parts of every single game, especially as a top laner. If you know the correct strategies to apply, then you can build consistent leads almost every single time, allowing you to carry games way more often. So in this guide, we'll be covering those crucial early levels, what you should be doing during them, and how to guarantee that you get a lead that you can snowball into a win. Let's get into it. And just in case you didn't know, our subscribers over at Skillcapped who don't play top lane are furious with us for creating our best ever course to date, How to Get Diamond in 30 Days as a Top Laner. It guides you step by step from being totally trash to legitimately carrying to Diamond in just 30 days. Check out Skillcapped right after this to take advantage and finally get the rank you've always wanted. Link in the description below for a special discount. Anyway, let's get straight back into it. The most important thing you need to consider every single game before making your game plan is to analyze who can get the early wave advantage. In top, you'll find yourself in melee versus melee matchups more often than any other role. What this means is that a minion advantage is super important, especially early on. Whichever player has more minions will usually win trades during the early levels, simply because you have to get up close and personal to trade. During those very early levels where champions are still weak, this means that minions will have a relatively much higher impact than later on in the game. This will usually come down to matchup experience, but to have a good idea of whether you can get early lane control over your opponent, you just need to ask yourself the following. Do I have a wave clear advantage with an AoE ability? Do I have the range advantage to pressure my opponent off the wave? Will I or my opponent have to leash for our junglers? Typically, the side that doesn't have to leash can get an early start pushing the wave. Or am I playing versus a powerful early lane bully? Once you got a good idea whether you think you'll be pushing or letting your opponent shove you in, here's what comes next. First, we'll analyze how to get a guaranteed lead when you're the one in the driver's seat, and then we'll break down how to regain control if your opponent is the one with the early push. To kick things off, let's watch one of the best top laners in the world, T1 Seus, show us how it's done. Despite being on Kayle, one of the weakest champions of all during the early game, we'll show you how playing around your wave early on will allow you to go aggressive despite whatever champion you're playing. At the start of the lane, it's important to note that neither Kayle nor Sejuani has a massive edge over the other in terms of early wave clear, which means that auto attacks will be a huge factor in who gets the push. Notice how Seus is constantly auto-attacking the wave, while the enemy Sejuani does the same. Both sides are desperate to get the minion lead. A small tip you can apply if the race to get wave control is close is to get creep aggro by targeting your opponent with either an auto-attack or spell, like so. This will cause the enemy minions to hit you momentarily. Usually this isn't good as you're taking excess damage. However, when you really want to get the shove, having minions hit you instead of your own minions can often allow you to get the edge in the push over your opponent. Anyway, due to Seus focusing very well on spam auto-attacking the wave and abusing that prior trick, he ended up with the wave advantage. As we've covered, this is now Kayle's turn to take the offensive, but it's actually Sejuani who forces a trade. Sadly for her, this will predictably be a very, very bad trade. It's important that during these early levels that you don't focus too much on the specific matchup that you're in. Even when you're against something as weak as Kayle, you will often lose out on the fight if you're fighting at such a minion disadvantage. Having won that fight, Seus now positions very aggressively, looking to abuse the lead he's now acquired. Then, once he gets a chance, he goes to set up a ward. We're not here to cover jungle tracking, but this is a really good autopilot trick for you to keep in mind. Much like Seus, when you notice this third cannon wave coming into lane, you can go place your ward. It is very rare that junglers will gank before this specific wave arrives in lane, so make it a habit to always ward before this timing if you're the one pushing and playing aggressively. Back to the task at hand, we do need to mention something important Seus is doing. Notice that while at level 1 he was very aggressively attacking the wave, he's now only last hitting and mostly focusing on zoning the Sejuani. Keep in mind that you spam auto attacks to build a wave advantage, but once you have it, you want to transition into slow pushing so that you can deny and harass your opponent as much as possible. Sejuani is now dipping dangerously low on health, and it's time for Seiyus to finish this lane off. Now, there's multiple ways of winning from this point. The most obvious is outright killing your opponent, and we'll cover some other ways soon. In this specific case though, Seiyus had so much pressure in top that he baited the enemy mid laner to try and come here and help. Sejuani was too low to offer any assistance, and so Seiyus was able to easily bait the enemy Yasuo into his own jungler for a free kill. This is obviously not what's going to happen every time. The whole point here is that when you're winning lanes so dominantly, that almost everything you do is going to end up going well. Okay, so we've made a big point to highlight how the enemy Sejuani messed up. She tunnel visioned way too much on trying to shut down Kayle, which got her overly harassed for no reason. What if your opponent plays safe during your initial push though? For that, let's review another matchup. This time we'll take a look at another challenger game of a Gnar versus Riven. This lane begins with Gnar being attacked by Riven at level 1. Unfortunately for her, due to his range advantage, he ends up winning the trade. However, this won't be like the last replay. Yes, Riven took a bit of damage, but she had a lot of potions to work with. Not only that, but after the initial trade she went for, she started respecting Gnar a lot more and played very safe, only walking up to CS when she could do so without taking any damage. As a result, after Gnar's crash to the first few waves, she wasn't that low at all. Now, here's where things can vary. Generally, you crash on your opponent on the 3rd or 4th wave of the game, just as Gnar has done here. You usually have a few options off this. Depending on your opponent's health and your own jungler's pathing, you could look to dive them. In this case, Riven is way too healthy and Taliyah isn't close enough, so that's a no-go. While your opponent is stuck under tower farming minions, you could just go look to do something else. That's an okay option, and we'll cover that in a bit. But at this point in the lane, both of you are level 3 or 4. What this means is that now a minion deficit won't be nearly as bad as it was at level 1. If you feel like you have a good matchup and you can punish your opponent even when they have the wave advantage, then you can just play for the bounce back they're about to get. Due to the even minion rule, whenever a wave crashes into a tower, it'll slowly begin pushing towards the other side of the lane. Gnar, with his ranged advantage, was setting this up from the start. You see, your opponent can just play safe while the wave is pushing into them and eventually get to farm under the safety of their tower. But as we said, if you're in a matchup where you can win fights even at a minion deficit, then this is what you'll want to set up from your first crash. With the wave pushing away from her, Riven is forced to walk up in the lane if she wants to farm, which means that Gnar can make her life a living nightmare since she can no longer just play safe. And now that he's in such a winning position, you just finish off your opponent based on what you think would be best in your own games. This is a challenger level game, so Gnar is very coordinated with his jungler Taliyah. He sees her pathing top, so he started converting his freeze into a push again. This is so that they could coordinate a dive into Riven. However, she just ends up dying before that even occurs. Anyway, this is less likely to happen in your games. Your junglers are way less vigilant about punishing your laners when they're in a bad spot in low elo. If you were Gnar in the same situation, you could just keep freezing the wave and slowly pressuring Riven into taking a bad recall while the wave is pushing away from her. This would cause her to miss a ton of farm and experience, which is another way of getting a guaranteed lead from this start. Now let's talk about the final tactic you can use to get a lead during the early game when you get the early push. Let's take a look at this Yasuo game versus a Mordekaiser. Just based on the matchup, Yasuo will get the early wave control versus Mord. He just has more damage at level 1 with his low cooldown Q, whereas Mord needs some levels in his spells before his wave clear becomes good. Although he's getting a trade here or there, Yasuo isn't making a ton of progress on Mordekaiser's health bar since he's playing relatively safe and preserving his health as he should be. What this means is that Yasuo goes for the third tactic you can apply we hinted at, leaving lane after a crash. Notice that as the third wave comes in, Yasuo begins hitting the minions aggressively instead of slowly pushing the wave. Normally, you slow this down to harass your opponent as much as possible, as we saw in the Kayle example. But if your opponent is playing safe and not allowing you to harass, then you'll want to immediately push here. This way, your wave is as big as possible when you crash it, as that will be how you net your advantage this time. With the crash, your opponent is stuck under their tower for a while. This gives you an opportunity to move around the map and do whatever you wish. You could go help your jungler at Scuttlecrab, but Volibear isn't there yet, so that's not really an option. You could gank mid, but that doesn't seem too possible here, especially since Yasuo isn't a great roamer. So instead, Yasuo looks to base. This is the tactic you'll go to the most often. By doing so, you can get an item lead over your opponent and come back to the lane stronger than before. This is especially potent if you notice that your jungler was pathing towards your lane in the early game. The big benefit of this tactic is to remember about the wave bouncing off the crash. Yasuo mentions to his Volibear how the wave is going to be pushing away from Mordekaiser, making him vulnerable to a gank. Mord is a decent player and well aware of the danger he's in and places a ward. However, the beauty of this tactic is that you already managed to sneak a base in, and you likely picked up a control ward to deny vision. Now, Mordekaiser is completely boned. Volibear sets up a gank and gets his flash. Sadly for Mordekaiser though, the wave is still frozen against him. If he bases, he loses a ton of farm, and if he doesn't, he'll die. Tragically for him, Volibear had the patience to stick around, and this lane is easily won in a predictable way. Now, please don't think this is only viable if your jungler is coming to help you gank. You could have used this strategy on your own. As Yasuo got back to lane, he had an item lead over Mordekaiser. He could have just thinned out the wave and then proceeded to trade and won that way. Again, the point of all these tactics is that you set up a good lane state, and from there, almost anything you do is going to be effective. It just depends on the specific game that you're in. Okay, so you should have a pretty good idea of all the ways you can punish your opponent when you have the push lead. But as we all know, that can't always happen. Sometimes your opponent will have the stronger matchup and you'll be the one getting shoved in. What do you do then? Well, it's actually really simple. Whenever you're in the opposite of a favorable situation, you often just want to ask yourself, what does my opponent want to achieve and how can I make it hard for them to do so? Remember, the main goal of having the wave advantage early on is to win trades, set up ganks or dives, etc. Then it should be fairly obvious that your main objective while you're the one being pushed in is simply to avoid taking trades and to pressure your health as much as possible. Here, let's show you one of the worst examples of what you can do when you're in a bad matchup early on. Let's take a look at this Cho'Gath versus Gangplank replay. You've all played against a GP before. He's one of the most obnoxious lane bullies in the game at the moment. Not a lot of champions can deal with his level 1 pressure, and Cho'Gath definitely can. Which means that the literal first thing Cho does in this lane is absolutely horrendous. He Qs the wave to try and last hit, but sadly misses the minion anyway. That's not why it was awful though. The real crime is that he also hit these two melee minions at the same time. It is imperative that when you're in the losing matchup early on, that you do not hit the wave more than you need to. What this will do is cause it to stall out in the center of the lane for longer. This gives your opponent more and more opportunities to harass you. A good way of thinking about it is to yet again remember that Kayle game from Seus. He was barely hitting the wave at a certain point since he wanted to keep harassing as much as possible until the crash. Well, by hitting the wave more than you need to, you're effectively doing that for your opponent, just backwards. Hopefully that makes it clear why Cho'Gath is seriously trolling himself here. You can see just how awful this lane is becoming for Cho. Then, once Gangplank hits level 2, it just gets a whole lot worse, since he now has to deal with barrel harass on top of being spammed by GP's Q. Eventually, since the wave continues to remain in the middle of the lane, Cho'Gath takes a really poor trade and is lucky to even get out alive from that situation. Playing from behind is actually really simple when you know what to avoid. All you have to do is be patient and wait for your opponent to crash the first few waves. Notice the difference between this Akali, one of our experts, from the previous Cho'Gath. She's just sitting back patiently and allowing Fiora to crash the wave into her. It's really that easy, and now that the wave has crashed, the tower will equalize the waves and allow Akali to hit level 3. Not only that, but as we mentioned before, due to the even minion rule, Akali will now have a chance to build her own slow push versus Fiora. This is the timing you want to wait for in those matchups where you naturally lose the shove. For example, if you're Camille versus Renekton, there's no way you can contest his pushing at level 1 because of his AoE wave clear from Q. However, if you wait for him to crash the wave, you can offset his wave clear advantage thanks to your tower and the wave being closer to your side of the lane. This is the timing that Camille would go aggressive versus a Renekton. She can't force a minion lead, but she can patiently wait for one to naturally build up for her, and then look to win trades that way. And that's exactly what's happening here. There's no way Akali can contest Fiora's shove at level 1, so she just waits for this bounce back to play off of. From this point on, you just try to do anything which we covered earlier. You can use this slow push to trade aggressively, get a recall off, dive, etc. It's the same thing as before, just delayed. In this game, our expert just happened to go for a bit of a risky bait and limit test a 1v2. Again, the specifics aren't really relevant, it just goes to show that there's multiple ways to approach a lane after you've solidified a good spot for yourself. And those are all the main concepts you need to keep in mind during these critical early levels. Remember that it's consistency and predictability that will help you climb in the long run. During your games, try and achieve the goals we've talked about in this guide and see how often you can make them a reality in order to get an early lead. You'll find that your laning phases will become much more consistent and easy if you apply these tips early on. Alright guys, before we wrap this up, let's tell you a little more about Skill-Capped. So, we offer a 5-division rank-up guarantee, and think that's a pretty crazy thing to offer. It's like a gym membership guaranteeing you'll get ripped. Your local gym would go bust if they offered that, right? Not us. We've offered this for years because our service really does work. It works so well, in fact, that we're able to produce by far the largest catalog of premium league guides on the internet. We add over 20 videos a week, with over 1,600 guides curated into over 100 courses no one can compare. We've also sent Challenger players into ELO Hell 714 times and counting, where they commentate how to carry live. They also respond to all questions asked. Sign up today for as little as $6.99 a month if you are serious about improving. Anyway, that's all for this guide, guys. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.